All right, so today we're talking about Joseph, and the title for the sermon is God Was With Him, and that comes from the book of Acts, chapter 7. This is Stephen is preaching and giving the rundown of how they got to the point where they could legitimately say that God was going to destroy the temple, because that was the accusation. They said he's talking about destroying the temple, and they're like, how could this be? And so he gives them a rundown, a very quick rundown of their national history to explain how it is they got to this point and why that was a valid deduction or conclusion to that. But we're not going to look at that today. That's actually a very interesting topic. We'll deal with it another day. But today, let's just look at what he says here about Joseph. And he says, and the patriarchs, moved with envy, sold Joseph into Egypt, but God was with him. Now that's very interesting, because it goes from that point to him being, the next verse, being second in command in Egypt. Right. Kind of just jumps. So you have this young boy, he's this teenager, he's probably about 14, 15, 16, something like that. He's not very old. And his brothers are upset at him, they're envious at him, and so they sell him into slavery. And then the next thing you know, according to Stephen, is he's number 2 in command in arguably the most powerful nation on earth at the time. And so you wonder, how does a 15-year-old boy being sold as a slave end up being number 2 in command in a huge nation the size of Egypt? And Stephen tells us what happened in between those 2 points of time. God was with him. Now that's a really interesting way of just sort of like, fast forwarding. I don't know if you've seen movies, and I know the youth are wanting to do some film stuff, and you watch a movie and they'll they'll show something in slow motion, all of a sudden it'll go, and all of a sudden you're at the end, and it's like, what happened in between? That's kind of what Stephen's doing. He says, he's sold into slavery, and now he's number 2 in Egypt. And what happened? God was with him. Well, we go back to Genesis, we find out a lot happened during that time, right? And when we read all that happened, we have to say, Stephen, he pretty much nailed it right on the head. That was a really good description of everything that happened. God was with him. Very interesting, Joseph, his story. The story of Joseph is a story of adversity. It's a story of everything going wrong whenever anything could go wrong. He's a young man, and he is sold into slavery by his own brothers. Slavery is something that has existed as far back as we have recorded history. It's nothing new. It's not nothing special to America. It actually still exists today in some parts of the world, regrettably. And it's a terrible, terrible thing. There's nothing good about it. And if you can imagine yourself at 14 or 15 or 16 years old being sold by your own brothers to slave traders that are hauling you across the desert to you don't know where, well, that would probably be a very scary thing. That's a level of adversity you and I have never encountered, and hopefully never will. But there's a tremendous amount of stories of people who have had that very basic thing. People show up, maybe not their own family members, though at times it actually was, and would show up and haul them off, and they would never be seen again by their loved ones. And then he gets to Egypt, and somehow he makes it into being a servant in the household of an important man, and he applies himself, and he works hard, and he gets himself up to where he's got a good position. And then because of a false accusation, he's again drug away and thrown into the prison, into a dungeon. And these aren't the prisons like in America. I know I put that little graphic, and it was real hard to find a little graphic to put somebody in prison that didn't look like he belonged there. Get someone who did. Yeah, all the pictures, you look at him, you're like, well, that guy looks like that's right where he belongs. That's not how prisons looked like at all during that time. That's right. They were dark and mildew-filled holes. And there's no yard time, there's no weight room, there's no televisions, there's no good food. You're just thrown down in there, and hopefully you survive. And if you don't, they're not too concerned about that. And he finds himself in prison, and again he rises up to the top, and he gets himself up to where he's like a trusted person there. He's a custodian, and he's in charge of the prison. And then these people come in who have authority in the government, or at one time did, and he helps them out, and he thinks, well, maybe this is my way out of here, and then they just forget about him again. And he's just sitting in the dungeon. It doesn't look like anything better is going to happen. I mean, he just had his best chance. The man who actually serves Pharaoh his cup. He owes him a favor, and he does. That's why I hate favors. I just hate them. They're so expensive. So much cheaper just to pay for what you want. And he finds himself again at the bottom. But then God was with him. And he comes out and he rises to the top, and he's at the top. There's only one man above him now in the entire country, and that's Pharaoh. And you wonder, how does somebody like that come out? Well, adversity reveals a lot of things. Reveals a lot of things. That was the thing about Joseph. Joseph was a very interesting fellow. One of the more interesting ones in the entire Bible, actually, in my opinion. And adversity revealed that about him. If it hadn't been for all the adversity in Joseph's life, he may have just been that smug, pompous, daddy's boy, suffering from bouts of nepotism. Daddy just gave him everything he wanted, and his life was easy, and all his brothers said, well, he's not special. He's just got a daddy who loves him, and daddy just takes care of him, and daddy's always on his side, and that might have been his life. But because of the adversity that he was put through, it revealed the truth about Joseph. And when we're in adversity, it reveals some truths about us. Adversity reveals our true talents. Adversity reveals our true talents. Joseph was a very talented man. We know that because of his adversity. Now, his brothers, they envied him, and they threw him in that pit, and then they sold him into slavery because they didn't think he was very exceptional. They didn't think he deserved the attention he got. They didn't think he deserved the love or the respect that their father had towards him. And they didn't think he deserved the love and respect he had for himself, apparently. And so they didn't like him. And they're like, you're a little snot-nosed kid, and you need to learn your place. Of course, they took it a little too far, right? Maybe just an atomic wedgie would have been sufficient. Maybe that would have been acceptable. It is, no matter how talented you are, you always need someone to put you in your place, because you're not nearly as talented as you might think you are. And even if you are, you need to learn that there's more to life than just talent, right? Raw talent is not sufficient. And he certainly wasn't just lucky. They think, he's just lucky. He's a lucky person. But luck doesn't get you very far. It certainly doesn't make you successful. I mean, there's a lot of people that get lucky in Las Vegas. They go in. In fact, I had a family member that did this. And my dad was working in Las Vegas, framing apartments, and he had his crew was there. And they'd go to the casinos at night to eat supper because it was so cheap at that time to eat in the casinos. It's just like $1 or whatever. You could have a steak dinner. So they'd go there, and that guy would never gamble. And then one day someone said, look, they gave him a quarter. They said, look, just put it in that slot machine just so you can say that you went to Vegas and you gambled. So he's all right. So he stuck it in and he hit the jackpot. Only quarter he'd ever gambled in his life. Some people are just lucky, but most lucky people leave the casino broke. That's right. They put it in, boom, they hit the jackpot, they're lucky. By the time they're gone that night, they're actually in the hole. That's right. There's a reason why those casinos are real big and your house is real small. Because they're on the right end of the gambling thing. And you're on the wrong end of it. No, Joseph wasn't just lucky. Joseph was extremely talented. But we know that because of the adversity in his life. We know that because when they put this young little boy into slavery, everywhere he ended up, he rose right to the top. Now, you might be lucky once. Maybe twice. But you don't run Egypt out of luck. He was an extraordinarily talented person. Extraordinarily talented. And people whose job was to be able to identify talent and put it into places where it could be most efficiently utilized acknowledged him almost instantaneously. There's talent right there. This is an extraordinary person. You wonder why you have adversity in your life? One reason why is because God wants to reveal the talent that you have. And as long as you live a cushy, soft existence, then you don't need talent. As long as you have Daddy giving you your coat of many colors, as long as you have someone watching over you and protecting you, say, don't pick on him and be nice to him, you don't need any talent. But when you get thrown out into the hard, cruel world and you have adversity come up against you, then your talents will show forth. You don't have to be a very skilled cyclist to go real fast when you're riding downhill. It's when you got to go uphill. That's why bicycle races aren't all downhill. You need adversity in your life if you want your talents to show forth. And you have been given talents by God, every one of you. It's what I believe Paul is talking about when he says that we've been called from our mother's womb. That God designed you from the time you were conceived with special gifts. Gifts and abilities and talents that others do not have. But as long as you try your hardest to never suffer any adversity, those talents will never show forth. Look what Paul said. Therefore I take pleasure in infirmities, in reproaches, in necessities, in persecutions, in distresses for Christ's sake. For when I am weak, then I am strong. When I have infirmities and afflictions and adversity and something pushing against me, then I'm strong. I sent Albert a picture the other day on his phone of a policeman with a weight, right? He's doing curls, and it's a dumbbell with donuts on the end of it. You know? Every time it goes up, you take a bite, it gets lighter and lighter as you go. It's like, you think, well, that doesn't prove that he's very strong. If you got something light like that, that's true. The only way you know if you're strong is if you got some weight on you. That's right. You got to have some resistance. That's right. In fact, you can't be stronger unless you actually move against resistance. That's right. If all the time one of the problems with space travel is that in zero gravity, there's no resistance against their muscles, and they lose muscle mass incredibly fast. This is the problem with the idea of trying to get to Mars, is that they can't actually survive that long in space. Bone mass, muscle mass, everything. And then they extend, they get longer. One guy grew 4 inches, I think, in space in a short amount of time. It's an incredible, horrible thing on your body. You think, man, I would love to just live in a place where I could just float around and there'd be no affliction, there'd be no pressure, there'd be no resistance. Everything would be easy. Life would just be so easy and it'd be so wonderful. And it wouldn't be wonderful. You'd lose all ability to perform in any way. Our particular and individual gifts that God has given us, they thrive in affliction. You never know who's special until times get tough. And then you find out who has a special ability in that situation. Not only does it reveal our true talents, it reveals our true commitment. When adversity comes into our life, whether or not we are committed is revealed. You know, everybody's committed when things are going well. And when you're growing in a very fertile, very watered, very easy terrain, and your life is just simple, of course you're committed. Everybody's committed on the wedding night. Yeah, that's right. Right? It's a year later. When Armageddon has happened, and I mean, your wife's hair is like everywhere in the morning, and you're like, oh, it's like that guy who marries that beautiful opera singer, and she can just sing so lovely, and get married, and they get to the hotel, and she starts by taking off her wig, and she's bald, and she takes out her fake eye, and takes out her false teeth, and pulls off her false leg, and he says, honey, sing, sing. There's got to be something real left. No, when things aren't the way you expected they were going to turn out, that's where it's hard to be committed. It's in adversity where we find out whether you really meant, I do. That's right. Or maybe you just meant, I doubt. How do we know when we're committed to God? That's what Satan said. God said, hey, Satan, look at Job. You ever seen someone like that? Now that's an exceptional man. Look at that. And Satan said, you give him everything he wants. Of course he loves you. If you gave me everything I wanted, I might love you too. God says, all right, let's take everything away. Let's strip him of everything. And let's find out. Does Job love God because God takes care of Job? Or does Job love God because he is committed? You know what we found out through Job's adversity? You know what Job would have been had he not had adversity? He would have just been another one of those many rich people that are in the world that you don't even remember their names anymore. I would suspect that there's a number of you youth in this room who don't know who John Rockefeller is. Or a lot of other of them. J.P. Morgan. These were men who were so wealthy that in adjusted inflated dollars, they're wealthier than all the wealthy Americans today. Who are they? We don't know. Who's Job? Everybody knows who Job is. Why do we know who Job is? Had nothing to do with his wealth. Had to do with his commitment. And we know about his commitment because of his adversity. We know who Joseph is. Joseph's life would have been entirely different had he not been sold into slavery, had he not been falsely accused, had he not been forgotten in the bottom of a dungeon. He would have been a different person, at least in our eyes. It's his adversity that we say, now that's commitment. Joseph is committed to doing right. He's committed to doing right from the bottom of a well with his brothers, trading him away as if he were cattle. He's committed to doing right, even if it means losing his cushy job in Potiphar's house. He's committed to doing right, even if it means being forgotten in a dungeon. He's committed to doing right. He's going to do his job to the best of his ability, and it doesn't matter the adversity that's around him. How many of us might have said, you know what? I tried once. I tried to be a good brother, and it didn't work out for me. Forget it. I tried to be a good employee. I worked hard. I got falsely accused and got thrown out and put into jail. Forget it. I'm just giving up. Our adversity sometimes reveals our lack of commitment. You think, I'll be committed to the things of God, but as soon as adversity comes along, as soon as it's not working out the way you thought it would, we all envision how it's going to work out. We envision how a marriage will work out. We envision how a family will work out. We envision how a church will work out. We envision how a ministry will work out. And then it doesn't work out that way, and we think, oh, it's hopeless. It can't be done. Joseph found himself in a place where commitment didn't seem to be paying off. That's what adversity reveals. What does James tell us about this? He says, take my brethren, the prophets, who have spoken in the name of the Lord for an example of suffering, affliction, and of patience. Behold, we count them happy which endure. Ye have heard of the patience of Job, and have seen the end of the Lord, that the Lord is very pitiful and of tender mercy. He says, look at the prophets. Look at these people. Look at Job. Look at Joseph. Look at Abraham. What do these people have in common? That when it got tough, when life didn't work out the way they expected, they didn't give up. How many people were sold into slavery the same day that Joseph was sold into slavery? Quite a few. Slavery was an incredibly predominant institution, if you want to call it that. Yet only one of them rises to the top of Egypt and saves an entire nation. It reveals our talents. It reveals our commitment. Adversity reveals our true faith. We like to talk about faith, and we talk about it in ways that many times doesn't make a lot of sense. We talk about faith as believing things that are more properly called superstition. Believing things you can't prove, you can't argue for, you don't have any evidence for, you just want them to be true. Wishful thinking is what we many times call faith. And that's not faith at all. Faith is something real. Faith is based on evidence. Faith is in things that are true. Believing something that's not true doesn't make it true. You can believe all you want in something that's false, and it won't make it true. It has to be true to begin with. Otherwise, it's delusion. We talk about faith a lot, but many times we don't have real faith. According to Hebrews 11, real faith is what we have when we have adversity. In fact, Paul even tells us that there's coming a time when there will be no faith. That in the kingdom of Christ, when you're looking at Him face to face, you're not going to have faith. People say, well, when I see God, I'll believe. No, you won't. It'll be too late to believe. That's like the Apostle Thomas. He says, until I put my finger in His hand, and my hand in His side, I won't believe. The catch is, when Jesus appeared and said, put your finger in my hand, and put your hand in my side, it was too late to believe. You can't believe, you can't have faith in something you're touching and seeing. That's not faith. You can accept it as a reality, but it's not the same as believing. And the Bible says that anyone who is going to approach God must believe that He is. And He is the rewarder of those who diligently seek Him. God is not impressed when reality smacks you in the face and you accept it. When you walk outside and you get drenched and wet and you say, I believe it's raining. That's not very impressive. God's impressed when somebody comes to you and says, here's the evidence of this truth. And you look at the evidence and you say, I can't see it for myself, but I'm going to accept it by faith. Now that's impressive, because that's hard to do. Because we're all naturally skeptical. We naturally disbelieve what people tell us, and you should. You should. Faith should be something that persuades you. Adversity reveals that faith. How do we know if we really have faith, if we really believe something that we can't see? Because when adversity comes and everything gets dark, we stand fast. You know, people come and they say, look, this is the gospel and this is how you get saved and this is what Jesus did. And you say, oh yeah, that's wonderful. I like it. I believe it. Well, it's easy to believe it when things are going well, but what happens when, because you believe in Jesus Christ, your family won't speak to you? Or in some places in the world today, you believe in Jesus Christ and you lose your life. When those people stand there and they say, we don't care whether you kill us. Like those 3 young men in Daniel who said, God can free us from the furnace. But if not, we're still not going to worship your image. That's right. Even if we die a fiery death, we are not going to do that. Because we believe that idolatry is wrong. They had faith. And how do we know they had real faith? Because they had faith in adversity. What does Peter say? That the trial of your faith, being much more precious than of gold that perisheth, though it be tried with fire, might be found unto praise and honor and glory at the appearing of Jesus Christ. It's the trial of your faith that makes your faith valuable. It's there, but it's all covered with dross. It's all covered with other stuff. It's hard to know. You can't tell if somebody else has faith. God can, but we can't. But when somebody is put through trial, put through adversity, their faith shines forth. Your faith shines in adversity. You wonder why God allows you to have adversity. Why does it? If God could just get rid of it, and He could just wave His hand and everything that afflicts you would disappear and your life would be clouds and candy. And why doesn't He? Because then your faith would not shine. Everyone would say, well, of course they believe in God. Everything goes well for them. Why wouldn't they? It reveals our true hope. Adversity reveals our true hope. You know one problem with Christians that don't have adversity in their life? That do everything they can to avoid it? That they actually think that their hope is living comfortably in this life. Now look, there's nothing wrong with being comfortable. Terry will tell you that I go to all extremes to be comfortable. I remember someone gave me a little VCR and didn't have a remote control. Now that's just a terrible thing to do to somebody. Like, no remote control. So I got some sticks and some strings, and I rigged up a whole remote control system that I could use by pulling these strings so I could fast forward and play and pause the VCR. Terry came out, and the living room's full of all these wires running everywhere, and I'm pulling them. I was so happy, I didn't have to get up off the chair. Love comfort. I work twice as hard to work less. And we think, now that's the goal in life, is comfort. Well, if you could actually achieve that goal and it was lasting and real, well, that would be something worth considering and discussing. The problem is, no matter how comfortable you are, you're coming upon a time where you are not going to be comfortable. Ask anybody who's old. You think, if I could just sit in a chair all day, I'd be so comfortable. Ask them. You ever seen an old person get out of their chair? It takes them like 5 minutes. You got to let them know we're going to be leaving in a few minutes. You need to get yourself erect. Comfort, it does not last. You'd better have a higher hope than comfort in this life. You think, well, I don't have affliction right now in my life. That's good. I'm not telling you to go out and look for it. But I'm telling you it's looking for you. Trouble, you shouldn't go looking for it. But it is looking for you. And it's going to find you and smack you right in the face one of these days. And if your hope was to make it through your whole life and never have problems, you're going to find out that was a very poor hope. We're told as Christians that we have a higher hope. And it gives us a whole chapter of example of this, because Paul dealt with this, saying Look, affliction's coming. The Jews and Hebrews that had confessed Christ, that was their problem. They expected we're going to believe in Christ and things are going to be smooth sailing. And they weren't. All of a sudden they had a tremendous amount of problems. And so Paul writes Hebrews 11 to explain to them, this is nothing new. Everybody who has ever trusted in God has the exact same experience. And he goes through this entire list of people, and the whole point of the whole list was, no matter what it was they did, no matter what level in society they came from, no matter what they achieved in life, they all have the same issue, affliction. They all had to be patient and endure affliction. It says they all died in faith, not having received the promises, but having seen them afar off and persuaded of them, they embraced them and confessed that they were strangers and pilgrims on the earth. For they that say such things declare plainly that they seek a country. And truly, if they had been mindful of that country from whence they came out, they might have had opportunity to have returned. But now they desire a better country, that is, an heavenly. Wherefore God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he hath prepared for them a city. What did he say about all these people, including Joseph, in Hebrews 11? Because he's mentioned there. What did he say about them? That they were not looking for anything on this earth. In fact, it says specifically about Moses in the same chapter, choosing rather to suffer affliction with the people of God than to enjoy the pleasures of sin for a season, esteeming the reproach of Christ greater riches than the treasures of Egypt, for he had respect unto the recompense of the reward. It says they did not want the things of this world. They weren't looking for comfort. They weren't looking for not having affliction, for ease. They were looking for a blessing from God. They wanted a better city. They weren't interested in Egypt. They wanted something better than Egypt. They weren't interested in a job in Potiphar's house. They wanted something better. And the reason why they could have commitment in affliction, the reason why they could have faith in affliction, the reason why they could let their talent shine out in affliction, because they were not serving the things of this world. They were looking for a heavenly city whose builder and maker is God, and they were looking for an eternal reward. And that's what affliction reveals in us, our true future, our true hope. You wonder why you have a hard time dealing with affliction? It might be because you don't have hope in anything eternal. You don't share Paul's opinion, who said, "For I reckon that the sufferings of this present time are not worthy to be compared with the glory which shall be revealed in us." Have you made that reckoning? Have you looked at the afflictions that you have compared to the glory that has been promised you and said, it's a worthy trade-off? It's a good deal. I think a lot of times we don't think of those two things being a good deal. We think, you know what? If it's going to be this hard, I'm just going to quit. If it's going to be this difficult, I'm just going to quit. If every time I try to do good, I get pushed down, I'm just going to quit. It just isn't worth it. Well, then you haven't reckoned very well. That's right. You haven't done accounts very, very well. You need to learn how to do a little bit of spiritual math. It's like the question that they used to ask in school. I don't know if they still do, but they used to ask this in school to try to make a point to the kids. And they'd say, what would you rather have? $1 million right now, or 1 penny a day doubled over the rest of your life? What would you rather have? Anybody? Who would rather have $1 million? There you go. There's always one of those. There you go. No, if you'll do the math, there's no comparison. That's the story of the chessboard. I'm sure many of you have heard this. The legend goes that a king wanted a new game, a great game, a game that would live for all time, be known as the great game. And so a guy came to him with a board with 64 squares on it and some pieces, chess. And they had promised, the king loved it, and he had promised a tremendous reward for whoever could invent this game. And he offered it to him, and the game maker said, that's not what I want. I want 1 grain of rice for the first square. I want 2 grains of rice for the second square. I want 4 grains of rice for the third square. I want 8 grains of rice, and so on. In every square, I want you to double the rice. Deal. His accountants, the king's accountants, come back later and tell him that the whole country, for all of eternity, cannot grow enough rice to pay the debt. This is in India. And Indians still sacrifice rice every year, believing they still have an unpaid debt. You need to learn to do math the way God does math. You think a little bit of comfort right now, that would make you happy. A little bit of ease, a little less affliction. That would, if you just had less affliction, you could accomplish more. It's not true. You have just the right amount. And every day God will give you just the right amount. Because He wants your talents to shine out. He wants your faith to be real. He wants your commitment to be true. And He wants your hope to be meaningful. And that's why we have affliction in our life. And when we look at the life of Joseph, we see a life of affliction. And yet Stephen looks at that same life and he says, you know what I see? God was with him. No matter what happened, God was with him. You want God to be with you? It might not look like what you think. You think, if God was with me, I'd never be poor. If God was with me, I'd never be sick. If God was with me, I'd never have friction. No, actually, that's quite the opposite. If God is with you, you're probably going to be poor. You're probably going to be sick. You're probably going to have a lot of troubles. And everyone's going to be able to look at you and say, there's a person who is very talented, very committed, has a lot of faith, and has an undying hope. That's what affliction did for Joseph, and that's what affliction will do for you. If anybody here today would like to speak to us, we want to talk to you. We have all the time in the world for you. Don't leave here with questions.